Good afternoon, everybody. Today is Tuesday, August 23rd. We're doing chapter 17b. Hopefully we'll get someone show up. Well, we don't have anybody in yet, but if they do come in, we will go ahead and add them in. And otherwise, I hope you guys are going to be watching this later so you can get your notes filled in. So today is chapter 17b. We're going to go ahead and get started with that. Okay, chapter 17b, control of the endocrine system, neurohormones secreted into the blood by neurons. Okay, the human nervous system produces several major groups of hormones. First is called catecholamines. They're released by neurons in the adrenal gland, which sits just above the kidneys. Hypothalamic neurohormones, we're going to be talking more about these. They control the pituitary gland. I think I already talked a little bit about that. All right, this is a figure that shows you the primary glands of the body. We have the pineal gland, which is in the brain, as well as the pituitary. Pineal gland is responsible for sleep-wake cycles. Pituitary controls all the other glands. The hypothalamus is right here. It doesn't show it, but it actually controls the pituitary. Thyroid, and right behind it are the parathyroid glands. Thyroid is primarily responsible for metabolism. So you have adrenal glands that are going to be producing a variety of different hormones. The pancreas produces hormones associated with about blood sugar. Hello, who's there?
Emily.
Emily who?
Valadez.
It's got my name. You signed in under my name.
I didn't know what to put for the username or user meeting thing, and I was like,
Yeah, you put your name, but it's not a big deal. It's not a problem. I was just like, I didn't realize I needed to join a meeting I was already in. And plus, it's 1T, by the way. So we were talking about the different glands. If you can see what I'm looking at, and you have your notes in front of you, these are the different glands associated with the body. We talked about the adrenal gland, pancreas involved in blood sugar balance, and uterus, ovaries, and testes involved in sexual characteristics. So moving on. Okay, we're going to talk about, this is another figure directly from your book. And what it shows you is where we are in the brain. We're here at the base of the brain. Not really the base. The base is normally considered here, but it's the bottom, the front part of the brain. See, the hypothalamus is shown here as kind of a bluish color, posterior in purple, green, anterior. So what we're going to see is primarily we're focused on the posterior pituitary. So let's talk really briefly about how that works. Okay, so what's interesting about the posterior pituitary is it doesn't actually produce any hormones. If you see that in the hypothalamus, which is where we are right now, the hypothalamus produces these neurohormones, which means hormones produced by neurons, and it moves them through these tracts. And what it is called is the hypothalamo-hypophyseal tract. Why do they call it that? Well, it turns out the hypothalamo means hypothalamus, and hypophyseal refers to the pituitary. So the hypothalamo-hypophyseal tract is a whole bunch of axons that are transporting vesicles full of hormones. And what's interesting is when they arrive here at the initiation of an action potential, is they actually release the hormones here. So the posterior pituitary is really just a site for the release of hormones produced in the hypothalamus. You might want to make a note of that. There's questions on the test about that. Does the posterior pituitary actually produce any hormones? The answer is no, it does not. It's only a site for the release of hormones produced up here. So it just transports them down here and releases them here. You can see ADH, antidiuretic hormone, and OT. That's not jumping into my head. This is a brand new figure for me. So anyway, so that's what it's trying to show. All right. Where in the neuron are the hormones of the hypothalamus produced? That would be in the cell body, because that's where most materials in the cell are made. So it'd be at the cell body. Does the posterior pituitary actually produce any neurohormones? No, it does not. It's only a site for the release of hypothalamic neurohormones. Okay, pituitary. It's a lima bean-sized gland below the hypothalamus. Remember, I'm still giving you the green. By the way, this green color indicating which word you fill into the blank doesn't last forever, but it's a nice little introduction to how to do my notes. It's composed of two parts, anterior and posterior. They're very different from each other. They couldn't be much more different, except that they're right next to each other. Posterior pituitary, it stores and releases two types of hormones. First, we call vasopressin, regulates water balance. How much water does your body keep versus how much is released through the urine? Oxytocin controls milk delivery and contractions during labor in women. So not a lot, but there you go. By the way, the OT from the previous image was oxytocin. It's not usually two separate words, but they use OT to summarize oxytocin. All right, anterior pituitary gland. Now this is completely different because it's actually going to be producing hormones, but it waits for a hormone from the hypothalamus to arrive. And then when that hormone arrives, it releases its hormones. So the hypothalamus produces hormones. They go to the anterior pituitary. That tells the anterior pituitary to release hormones. Those hormones go to other glands. It causes the other glands to release hormones. Now those hormones do the work of the body. Why is it so complex? Nobody knows for sure, but it's kind of like having a president, a vice president, a whole bunch of managers, and then the workers. So the hypothalamus is the president, the anterior pituitary is the vice president, the other glands are the managers, and the workers are the body cells. All right, 6 hormones. Prolactin is abbreviated PRL. Again, notice that they separate this one word into 2 chunks, pro and lactin, PR, and then L, PRL, actually into 3 separate letters. Thyrotropin. Okay, something you guys should know. Whenever you see the suffix that says tropic or tropin, what it means is it's a hormone destined for another gland, not regular body tissues. So whenever you hear the word tropic or tropin, it means it is a hormone that is going to a gland. Now, which one is it going for? The thyroid. So what it's saying is that it's a hormone that targets the thyroid and tells the thyroid what to do. Another name for it right here. Thyroid stimulating hormone. Much more clear. But thyrotropin and thyroid stimulating hormone, same thing. Adrenocorticotropin or adrenocorticotropic hormone. So what does that mean? You got to read it backwards. It's tropic, which means it's going to a gland. Which gland is it going to? The adrenal cortex. So the adrenal gland sits on top of the kidneys. The cortex is the outermost part versus the medulla, which is the center. So it's a hormone that stimulates the adrenal cortex to release its hormones. So remember, the pituitary gland primarily is telling other glands what to do. Human growth hormone, you guys have probably heard of that, HGH, sometimes just called growth hormone. Follicle stimulating hormone is primarily the main function in females, but has some function in males. Luteinizing hormone, same thing, mostly functioning in female reproduction, somewhat in male hormones. So this is the key. Most anterior pituitary secretions are tropic, which means that they control the secretion of another hormone in a separate gland. So whenever you see that term tropic, tropin means it's headed for a gland that's going to be secreting hormones into the blood. So that'd be an endocrine gland, primarily going to an endocrine. All right, here's a figure that is not in your book, but it's so good I kept it from a previous text. So I may be asking you about this. The question is, what are these hormones and what is producing them? Well, it's telling you what is producing right here. The hypothalamus is producing all of these hormones. So dopamine, prolactin releasing hormones, that's what it stands for. Thyrotropic releasing hormone, and growth hormone inhibiting hormone and growth hormone releasing hormone. The key is not that you have all these memorized, but that any of these pink ones are going to be primarily going to the anterior pituitary and telling them what to do. So prolactin inhibiting hormone is the opposite of prolactin releasing hormone. They work in opposition. So notice the dashed line with equal at the end means stop or prevent this from happening. So this makes it happen, this stops it from happening. So prolactin releasing hormone tells the anterior pituitary to produce prolactin, which goes directly to the female breast to tell her to produce milk. So dopamine, the opposite, tells the female breast not to make milk, and this is what would be released between pregnancies, between breastfeedings. Okay, thyrotropin releasing hormone, and then thyroid stimulating hormone. And you can see that all of these here, I'm not going to go through each one, but these anterior pituitary hormones then are going to go to the endocrine glands, thyroid, adrenal cortex, liver, and gonads. And these are the main hormones, by the way, that are actually going to control the body. You have hypothalamic hormones controlling the anterior pituitary glands controlling the endocrine glands of the body. And then these are going to release the hormones that primarily affect the regular body cells. That's what this figure shows. Okay, blood sugar balance. You guys have heard of diabetes before? Diabetes is, what's happening there is it's a problem with blood sugar balance. So, stimuli for production of insulin by the pancreas. Now, insulin is a hormone that's produced by the pancreas, and it does it when blood sugar levels rise, or when the body perceives that we've just eaten a meal. And I think we talked about this on a previous lecture. So the idea is the pancreas is going to be affecting not only digestion of food, but whether or not your body absorbs or releases sugar into the blood. Stimulation of stretch receptors in the stomach after a meal. You guys, if you remember watching my last lecture, we talked about how there's two different pathways for the release of insulin, one being the stretch receptors in the stomach, the other being increase in blood glucose levels. So these notes describe perfectly the figure from the previous lecture, which was 17a. So what is the reflex? It's the production of insulin. So either one of these can stimulate, or both can stimulate the pancreas. The reflex is producing insulin. What is the effect? Lowering blood sugar level. So it lowers blood glucose, and it's trying to get you back to homeostasis, which is steady blood glucose rather than elevated blood glucose. This reduces the stimuli. Now, it only reduces the stimuli, which is here, the increase in blood glucose, but it doesn't decrease the stimuli of stretch receptors in the stomach. So even though insulin is being released, if you still have a full stomach, you're still going to be stimulating the pancreas to produce more insulin. And this reduces insulin release. Again, assuming that your stomach is not stretched out still from a full. Okay, the next figure. We already did that figure from the previous lecture, so just go back and look at it from 17a. Okay, multiple hormones can target a single cell or tissue, so growth hormone is one of them. It means several hormones can affect a single target cell, and several hormones can also affect many different types of cells, and growth hormone is one of those. Somatomedins are another one. By the way, if you see a review question that says 2, or if it says 3 and there's actually 3 of them, that's just a typo. Please change it to the correct number. So growth hormone, somatomedin, and thyroxine are all 3 hormones that can target a single cell or tissue. So if it says 2, make it 3 because there's 3. All have receptors on many tissues. So what it means is all of these don't just affect a single type of tissue, can affect all different kinds of tissues. And that's not the rule for physiology. Usually the specific tissue types that are affected by hormones. These here are affected, many different tissues are affected by these hormones. And these all stimulate pathways for growth. Now, primarily growth hormone does this, especially when it comes to muscle tissue or height. The somatomedins and thyroxine can have an extra, or what's called ancillary effect on growth. Insulin-like growth factors are materials that are produced in response to certain stimuli, and I'll tell you more about the insulin-like growth factors coming up. Okay, here it is. So we talked about insulin-like growth factors. So make a note, and we're going to be talking about what do they do here. So please take notes on this figure. I may be asking you about this figure on the test. Okay, we have a stimulus. That the stimulus can be anything. It's going to stimulate a receptor. It's going to go from the receptor to a sensory neuron. But the key is it arrives at the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus gets stimulated. And this is basically stimulus for growth. So what does the hypothalamus do in response? It produces a hormone called growth hormone releasing hormone. Okay, you guys with me? So it goes from hypothalamus through the hypothalamo-hypophyseal portal system. It's a bloodstream, a blood vessel, and it arrives at the anterior pituitary. It exits and stimulates the cells of the anterior pituitary. What does the anterior pituitary produce? It produces growth hormone. So that's the little purple squares. Growth hormone leaves and goes to the body. Now, growth hormone arrives at the liver. It's one of the places it can get. And in response to growth hormone arriving at the liver produces what are called insulin-like growth factors. That means they're similar to insulin. They tell the body to grow. So these are going to get released by the liver, but some of the growth hormone is going to stay in the blood as well. So both the growth hormone and the insulin-like growth factors target cells, and it tells them to grow, get taller, get bigger, get stronger. So notice that growth hormone can either target an endocrine structure, which is the liver, or it can also target tissues directly. I guess there's no notes on it. It's just a figure. Okay. Synergism, term I want you to know. Multiple stimuli are more than additive. That means that if one hormone has 10 and another one has 50, you would expect together they would be 60, but they actually more like multiply. I'll show you how that works here. So if you add cortisol to the blood, you're going to get a plus 5 milligrams of glucose per 100 milliliters of blood if just cortisol is used. This is a hormone produced in the adrenal cortex, cortisol referring to where in the adrenal gland is produced. So if you add just cortisol, stress hormone, you get plus 5 milligrams of glucose per 100 milliliters of blood. Glucagon. Glucagon also raises blood sugar level because it works in opposition to insulin. So glucagon is going to raise blood sugar levels so that you can use it in your brain or in your muscles. So that's the plus 10 by itself. Epinephrine, which is also known as adrenaline, is going to increase it even more. So the question is, why do you want more sugar in the blood? Well, if you're in a fight or flight situation and you're going to either have to fight someone or run away, you're going to need lots of energy. You don't need it stored in your liver. You need it out in your blood supply so that you can get it into your brain and get it into your muscles so that you can do something very active to either fight or run. Now, if this was additive, you would expect 35, correct? 20 plus 10 plus 5 is 35. But all three of them together is 140. So it's almost multiplicative. It's not completely, because otherwise it would be 20 times 10 times 5. But it's much more than additive. It's almost 10 times additive, if you think about it. Antagonism is when two hormones work in opposition to each other, so they can't both be working at the same time. So glucagon is going to, as you see here, raises blood sugar levels. Insulin drops it. So glucagon is a hormone that's produced between meals to keep your blood sugar level nice and steady. And insulin is produced right after a meal so that when your blood sugar peaks or spikes, it brings it back to normal and move that sugar out of your blood and into your cells. Because if you don't, the body will process it out through the kidneys, and then you will lose that important energy source that our ancestors desperately needed. Permissiveness. The main hormone needs a second or third hormone to show full expression. That means it's there, but unless there's another hormone also there, it can't show full expression. A good example are reproductive hormones. So not testosterone by itself isn't enough to turn the little boy into a man. It has to be a combination of different hormones that are going to work together to have the effect of maturation. This is one example. Okay, this is the figure showing how the synergism works. You can see cortisol, very minimal effect. Glucagon, quick spike, diminishes. Epinephrine. And then if you had glucagon and epinephrine, it goes up. But look at what happens when you have all three. This is a perfect example of synergism. Okay, over or under production. Now, this is Andre the Giant. I don't know if you guys have any experience with him. He was in a movie called Princess Bride. If you haven't seen that movie, you really should. It's really back in the day movie, but it's a terrific movie. He was in it. And you get to learn a little bit about some of his physical manifestations of the pathology that he had. He had what is called gigantism as well as acromegaly. I'll describe those two here. So there's expression here that says there's no such thing as a bad hormone. You just make too much too little. All hormones in the body are there because they're supposed to be. And most people have just the right amount. But if you have too much or too little of something, you're going to end up with a pathology. Now, if you take a hormone in terms of an injection or a pill, it's called exogenous. And this is going to have an effect on your endocrine system. It's going to have an effect on your biology. So what it does is it replaces and exceeds normal. So for example, some people take melatonin. Melatonin helps you go to sleep, right? The problem with that is negative feedback. So if you guys remember, I talked about negative feedback is the way that we tell a gland to stop doing something is if there's already plenty of material there. So if the pineal gland is supposed to be making melatonin and you add some by taking it, you tell the pineal gland that it's not needed. If you do that over and over again, it's going to start to shrink. It shrinks, you're going to make less melatonin, and now you're hooked on taking melatonin supplements for the rest of your life because you've shrunken your pineal gland. So once in a while, it's okay, but if you continue to consume it, it's going to cause atrophy. That means if you don't use it, you'll lose it. And the same happens with muscles, right? If you don't use them, they start to shrink. So your pineal gland would shrink if you take too much melatonin. And the same with steroid hormones that are similar to testosterone. It makes your testicles shrink because the signal goes to the testicles. Hey, we already have plenty of androgens. You don't need to make more. And if it's not making it, it's going to shrink. Causes atrophy of the gland. Because the negative feedback says, hey, we're good. You don't need to make any. So testosterone, shrinking of testes, and lack of testosterone production. So people who take adrenal steroids, or excuse me, not adrenal steroids, but androgenic steroids is the word I was looking for. The ones that simulate testosterone. Roids, you guys have heard of roid rage. A lot of people who are trying to build muscle will do this, but the effect would be to shrink the testicles. Now, most bodybuilders aren't really interested in the size of their testicles, but they're interested in the size of their muscles. So it would actually shrink the size of the testicles. Hypersecretion, too much hormone produced. Now, you might think this guy on the bottom has too much hormone produced, but it's just the opposite, it's too little. Now, Andre the Giant is a good example of too much hormone. He had too much growth hormone. It can be caused by tumors or cancer. They don't know exactly what caused gigantism in Andre, but he not only had gigantism, by the way, the guy he's standing next to is probably 6'2" or 6'3", very tall guy. He dwarfs him. Andre was over 7 feet tall and 500 pounds, even without a lot of extra weight. So gigantism. So he suffered from both. So I'll show you what that means. Gigantism just means getting really, really tall. And what that does is the plates between our bones as we grow have a particular rate that makes our bones get longer and longer as we get mature. If you have gigantism, it means the cells in there divide really, really fast, and your bones get really, really long, faster, and you get really tall. A normal, what you call giant, would be tall and very slim. But Andre didn't just have gigantism, he also had acromegaly. Acromegaly is, at a certain point in our lives, regardless if we're giants or have gigantism, the plates between the bones are going to close, and that means you can't get any taller. But if you continue to produce too much growth hormone, you get the effect of, if you look at his fingers, how they're kind of thickened and swollen. You can see his brow ridges look kind of cavemanish, a little bit pronounced. And his tongue was swollen, larger than normal. And that's part of the reason why he spoke the way he did. So acromegaly is too much growth hormone after maturity, after your growth plates have fused. He's not going to get any taller, but those other manifestations, the fingers, the brows, and the tongue are a sign of acromegaly. So that's post-maturity hypersecretion of human growth hormone. Hyposecretion means too little. Now this goiter, this guy, a picture of a guy with goiter, is a good example. So the way that it works, it's kind of complex, so I'm going to have to explain it to you. Now, if you remember, I told you that if the signal doesn't arrive at a gland to produce something, it's going to atrophy. But what if the signal arrives and for some reason it can't produce the hormone? If the signal keeps coming over and over and over, but it can't produce the hormone that would shut down the original stimulus, the body's going to keep asking that gland to produce what it's supposed to be producing and won't stop until it makes what it's supposed to. But it can't. So in this guy here, what happened is hormones coming from the pituitary were going to his thyroid saying, please make some T3, T4, which is thyroid hormones. Because he didn't have enough iodine, or for whatever other reason, he couldn't produce the hormones that would have gone back to his pituitary and said, okay, we're good. You can stop stimulating. Because that signal never made it up to his pituitary, the signal kept going and going and going to his thyroid to tell him to produce it. And because he couldn't, it just kept getting bigger and bigger. Kind of the opposite of use it or lose it. If you use it too much, it'll just keep getting bigger and bigger. Now, this picture was definitely taken out of the United States. And the way that I know this is because if he had been in the United States with this, he probably would have gotten surgery or hormones or whatever he needed. So I'm guessing this is in Haiti. I'm almost certain that's where it was, or Africa, I think Haiti, and they didn't have the same kind of medicine that we would have had here. Diabetes is the one I'm talking about here is type 1 diabetes. Type 2 diabetes is where you consume too much sugar, too much food. You'd have downregulation and desensitization. In diabetes type 1, your pancreas just doesn't produce enough insulin. And that's not a fault of the person consuming the food. It's just that your pancreas doesn't produce enough. So a type 1 diabetic would be taking insulin because their pancreas just doesn't do it. And I'm actually a big fan of a show called American Ninja Warrior. One of the ninjas was a type 1 diabetic, and she had this little glucose pump and a little, am I thinking of insulin pump stuck on the back of her arms, each of her arms, a glucose pump and an insulin pump. And so she could maintain her blood sugar level, even though she was a diabetic, and still doing these incredibly athletic things. Shows you the future of diabetes treatment. Okay, due to receptors. Now, I mentioned this before, but I'm going to go into it a little bit more detail. Down regulation. So hyperinsulinemia means you produce too much insulin. Now, why would you do that? Well, you're eating too big of meals. Remember, we talked about that stimulus reflex pathway. Or you're eating too much sugar, or both. And what happens is too much insulin. It's like the boy that cried wolf. It's constantly bombarding the body cells. And because you're constantly bombarding it, they become desensitized. It's called desensitization or downregulation. You start removing receptors for insulin. It makes it much more difficult to get the sugar into the cells because you need a lot more insulin. Basically, the body says, well, if you're going to be producing so much insulin, we don't really need this many receptors. It's a problem. So sustained high levels of insulin cause the target cells to remove insulin receptors. Now it's much more difficult to get sugar into the cells. If you don't get an adequate sugar into the cells, they'll starve and die, especially in places like your feet, the retina of your eyes, your fingertips farther away from the heart. And sometimes people have to have their feet amputated because the cells are starting to die and decompose. And that happens as a result of diabetes. They show symptoms of diabetes in spite of high blood insulin levels. So this is type 2. Too high of insulin means that your body just can't respond very well to it anymore. And that's called downregulation or desensitization. What might cause insulin levels to remain excessively high? You mentioned that, right? Large meals or meals containing lots of sugar or both. And this is one of the main reasons why people end up with type 2 diabetes is they overeat, and the meals that they eat are full of sugar, just like a supersized meal at a fast food place with regular soda, right? Not only do the fries and the hamburger bun have sugar in them in the form of starch, but the soda is almost pure sugar besides the water. And it's going to cause a big, big spike in blood sugar levels and a big spike of insulin. And that's why people should not be eating those happy meals because they're not very happy. They don't make you happy if you have diabetes. All right, what's the best solution for this problem? Would it be medicine? No, it's a change in our diet. That's a very difficult thing to get Americans to do. They don't want to change anything, least of all their diet or their carbs. So instead of just adding medicine, you could tell people eat smaller meals more often with less sugar. That's a really tough sell for most people. So they end up with diabetes. But if you eat more smaller meals with lots less simple sugars, a lot less starch, you're going to have fewer problems. I have lost a lot of weight and come away from pre-diabetic condition by eating a lot more protein more often and smaller meals. I still fall off the wagon from time to time, but I'm not doing it as regularly as I was. So I've lost somewhere between 30 and 50 pounds, depending on where I was. So the key is reducing sugar intake, reducing total overall meal size, and total overall calorie count. All right, pineal gland and melatonin. Melatonin is produced by the pineal gland. By the way, if you ever see anything in the notes that says melanin, that's a typo. I've been looking for it, but I can't find it. My students always find it. So if you see melanin, change it to melatonin, because that's the word that we're looking for. There, it's produced by the pineal gland in the brain. It influences the body clock. When do we get sleepy and when do we wake up? So it's usually produced when your eyes perceive darkness. Now this gets short-circuited by the fact that we're constantly staring at our TVs and we have lights on at night and we're staring at our phones. And so that prevents the pineal gland from releasing melatonin. And then we turn it off at midnight and we don't want to go right to sleep. So our bodies are confused. The best thing to get to sleep is to turn the light level way down when you're getting ready to go to bed. Our ancestors maybe had a campfire, but when it got dark, they got sleepy and they went to sleep when it got dark. And when the sun came up, they got up. That's what our ancestors did. We tend to go to sleep much after sunset and we tend to get up much later than sunrise. It kind of throws off our cycle. So increase in melatonin levels causes drowsiness. This is why people consume it. Remember, when you consume it from the outside, you're telling your pineal gland it's not needed anymore, so it's going to start to shrink. I don't recommend melatonin levels except for once in a while. Taking it regularly can cause a problem. Insomniacs may take medication containing melatonin, but should probably not take it regularly because it'll cause the problem to get worse. Another thing that's associated with it is a thing called seasonal affective depressive disorder during winter months. This is especially true for people living in northern climate. For example, Montana, Montreal, Canada, Alaska, places like this. It's because lack of sunlight. So when your eyes don't perceive sunlight, it can cause you to become depressed, and there can be higher levels of suicide and violence associated with periods where there's a very short day or no day at all, in places like Alaska or Canada. Melatonin also has the antioxidant effect similar to vitamin C. So when I asked the question in review, what hormone has an antioxidant effect like a vitamin? It's melatonin. Or if I ask which vitamin, vitamin C. Okay, so there's the pineal gland. It tells you a little bit about it. It's buried deep in the brains. They thought back in the day that this was a valve regulating the flow of vile spirits and knowledge. Anyway, by the 1950s, they figured it out. Anyway, so here's some interesting stuff you can check out if you're interested. This shows you that you start producing melatonin from the pineal gland when it starts getting dark. And then when the sun starts to rise, it drops off. This is the structure of it. It's similar to the amino acid tryptophan. So what's interesting about that? You guys have heard that if you eat too much turkey, you get sleepy. Why? Well, since melatonin is derived from a tryptophan, it turns out that turkey meat has high levels of tryptophan. So your body's going to convert the tryptophan into melatonin, making you sleepy, and that's why we get sleepy Christmas and Thanksgiving. Not only the large meal, which stimulates us to want to go to sleep so we can digest better, but the tryptophan in the turkey is converted into melatonin and makes you sleepy. Fun fact. Okay. Any questions about this, about what I just said?
No, it was really self-explanatory.
Good, good. Well, I appreciate you being here, Brett. I really like your name. You have a great name. No, well, I do appreciate you coming. It's way for me, way better to have one person than nobody, because at least I
was able to come only because my communication class got put online because I guess the teacher was exposed to COVID. So that was.
Is that temporary or permanent?
It's only temporary.
Oh, that's a bummer.
It's just for this week. So
okay, well, even for 1 week, I appreciate having you here. Do you have any questions at all about what's happening in the class? You realize that we have an exam coming up this week, right? It's based on the review questions. Do you have any questions about those review questions that you may have had difficulty finding an answer to?
I just had to keep going through the lectures and rereading the notes again, and because some of it was kind of just in my face and I kind of either just skimmed through and didn't see it or something, but most of the time everything was pretty much in the notes and stuff. Good.
Well, if you have any questions between now and when you remember, you need to take the test by Saturday night, right?
Yes, I plan on taking it Friday. That's
good. Friday's a good day for it. Now, if you do have any questions, send me an email, but the closer to when you're going to take it, the harder it is, because Bella, stop. Sorry.
It's okay.
Because if let's say you're going to take it Friday night, you send it to me Friday morning, there's a chance I'm not going to check my email between the time that you send it to me and the time you need to take it. So the sooner you send me the questions, the better chance it is for me to get the answers back to you. By the way, if you send me a blank question, I don't answer those. So you have to give it some effort that shows you are looking for an answer. You got to provide some kind of an answer. Stop. Some kind of answer that shows that you made an effort and you're not just sending me a bunch of blank review questions that you're asking me to fill in for you. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
You're really just saying, hey, is the answer that I found correct or not? If it's not correct, I'll give you the right answer, but I have to see that you've made an effort to find it.
Yeah.
Okay.
I have a question. The only question I think I have is for
do you want to see the essays? Would you like to see the essays?
Yeah.
Let's do that. What do you say we do that? I'm going to let you see the essays, and everybody else who's watching this can see what essays there are. And that might be really helpful for you. There are 2 main essays. So let me show you. Okay, do you see the test?
Yes.
Okay, so if you remember, this was a figure that I talked about. This was the sodium potassium pump that is used for preparing the neurons for firing and max potential. So I talked about it. You might want to go back and rewatch that video, take detailed notes about how it works. Remember, the first sentence needs to be a summary of the entire figure. So I know that you could summarize the process. And remember, it's going from left to right, beginning to end. So there you go.
Okay.
Now, I talked a lot about fixed law. No, there's actually 3 essays. My bad. 3 essays. I talked a lot about fixed law, right? I don't think there was anybody in there. So it was hard for me to know whether I should go over stuff again because there was nobody asking questions. But I spent a lot of time talking about fixed law. I talked about how the body maximizes diffusion through both anatomical and physiological adaptations. And you just want to give me plenty of detail. Notice it says here, write out the formula. That means if you don't write it out, you won't get 5 points, period. I want to see the actual numerator stuff and a line under it and the denominator stuff. So I know you know what it is and that it matches what I lectured on.
You want us to fill it in, right? With what you told us to fill it in?
Right. So remember we talked about lipid solubility being not separate?
Yeah.
And how to kind of compress those 2 different things into one single fraction.
Yeah.
And so if you followed everything I said and you wrote it out correctly, that'll be a lot better for you than if you don't.
And that
don't grab something off the internet.
No, that you told me about the larger numerator on top and the smaller ones on bottom.
Right. That's how you maximize diffusion. Bigger numbers on the top, smaller ones on the bottom. Tell me all about it. Give examples, analogies where appropriate. You'll get it. Remember also that if you want to send me your essay in advance, the sooner you send it to me, the more likely I am to tell you whether you're on the right track. Normally, I don't go into tiny little details on it. I usually give generalizations, which is this is great, use it as is, or it looks like you could use a little bit more detail, especially in this, and this area. So if you want to let me know, I will tell you that probably 90% of all the students who send me their essays get a 5 out of 5 out of it, because most of the students who send it to me are really conscientious students who already write pretty well. So if you're thinking, I really want to send it to Mr. Sage because I want to find out if it's good, odds are it's already really pretty good. Okay, so you shouldn't fret too much. Okay.
Okay.
That's the second one. That doesn't mean you shouldn't send it, but you shouldn't worry too much. Send it to me if possible, but don't.
I possibly will.
That's good. That's a good thing. Always double check stuff. And if I say use it as is, by the way, that doesn't mean you don't have to take that part of the test. It just means copy what you sent me, put it in the test, because I'm not going to remember. I already told you it's awesome. And plus, me saying it's awesome is not the same as me grading. Does that make sense?
Okay.
Grading it is I have to actually put 5 points in and say accept. And pre-reading it means, yeah, if you use this on the test, I will give you a 5, but you still have to actually do the test. All right. I've had students say, oh, Mr. Sage, I already sent it to you, so I didn't do the test. I'm like, no. Okay, so this was electron transport chain or electron transport system. I spent a lot of time talking about that, how the electrons move, pumping hydrogens, flowing hydrogens, create ATP. The electrons need somewhere to go, like in a battery. They combine with hydrogen ions that are floating around, oxygen that you breathe, making water inside your body. Okay, same thing. Give me an overall sentence that describes the whole process in pretty good detail, and then go into each step. Just remember that these aren't numbered, so you kind of have to figure out what step is going to be what. You don't necessarily need a separate sentence for each step, but the more you write, the more detail you put in, the more likely you are to get a 5. Okay.
Okay.
And last but not least, tell me about one of your labs, one of the Labster labs. So basically, you're going to write a little lab report. Now, I don't ask you to write lab reports for your Labster scores, but if you can write up what you did and what the results were and what did you learn, you can earn up to 5 points. Up to 5 points on this. And this, by the way, this is the only source of extra credit for the whole course. There's no extra credit activities, no papers, no nothing. This is it. The last question on my exams is the only way to get extra credit. But smart students never, ever leave it blank. They always give me something. Because a few points could make the difference.
I was like, I'm probably going to write about how I messed up on the diabetes lobster one.
But it doesn't matter as long as you tell me about your experience and I know that you learned something about
Yeah.
diabetes, you learned something about lobster. Just tell me that you were involved in it, you learned something. Give me something to work with and I'll give you some points.
Sounds good. On our actual lab report, that's what I was going to ask you next. You, like, how long does it have to be?
What do you mean lab report?
Because we have a lab report due Wednesday.
Oh, let's see. What is it?
It's what we did with the iodine and starch at the membrane.
Oh, that's right. That's right. I forgot that we did that in
Ooh, I just
in
probably
class.
In class.
So yeah. So if you remember, I basically wanted the same kind of thing. Now, I don't want what you did with the iodine and starch for your extra credit on the test. I want something from Labster because you will have already told me all that stuff for your lab report, right?
No.
I don't want you to just recycle your lab report. So remember, in the lab report, the introduction is going to be what was the lab about? What were some of the ideas about molecular size and how big the holes in the membrane were, and what was diffusing and osmosis, stuff like that, right?
Okay, that's what I was trying to get.
Introduce
Like,
the ideas.
How long did you want the lab report?
I would say somewhere between a little over a page to 2 pages would probably do it. So you can have the introduction, then what did you do and what were the results and why they happened, and then the conclusion is what did you learn about osmosis, diffusion, et cetera, from doing this lab. It's pretty straightforward, but less than a full page. And by the way, for formatting, I don't know if I told you, space and a half-inch margins, not a whole lot of stuff at the top like name, date, teacher, your name, stuff like that pushes all the stuff down. You want to start near the top with your name and the title, and that's it. So if there's a big giant block of white at the top of your lab report, it's not going to be worth as much if you only do a page and a half or two.
Spacing.
1.5 line spacing and half-inch margins without a big block of white at the top, where you're trying to push all the words down by putting factoids about the lab and about me and about you and the date. I don't need any, right? I just need the title of the lab and your name and then start the lab.
My name. All right, that sounds good.
All right, good questions. I like all these questions. What else?
That was it, just about the lab report that I'm gonna do today right now. And
well, I'm glad you asked, because if you hadn't asked, the other people watching this would not know. The other thing I don't know if you guys noticed is that there is no more PowerPoint presentations available. So you can't get your notes filled in. Yeah, you can't get your notes filled in without either participating or watching. Because I had most of the students that were not watching this at all. They were just jumping right to the PowerPoint and not watching my lectures. And it's not that I'm that big of an egomaniac that I want you to watch, but I'm talking about stuff during the lecture that you're going to need for the test.
Yeah.
If you don't watch, then you won't get it. You won't do well.
And even in the notes, it tells you like, I'm going to be, this is going to be on the exam. So I'm like, okay, so I need to go in and be where you're talking about this diaphragm or picture.
Diagram.
Sorry.
Diaphragm is under our lungs, but you're in the right part of the body. That's for sure.
So yeah, I'm like, okay, so I really need to listen to the lecture, especially with the lecture with chapter 3. That one I had to keep kind of going back over and over again a little bit.
Well, that's why it's nice it's recorded, isn't it?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I do appreciate you coming. I'm sorry that I won't have you next week or the following, but if it gets canceled again.
We did talk about in class that about changing it so that everyone can join. I don't know if that's still possible.
Yeah, why don't we talk about that? Am I going to see you tomorrow in class?
Yes, you will.
So let's talk about maybe changing the lecture time so that more people can attend. Will you please remember to remind me, because I'm spacey, to talk about moving it so that more people can attend. Okay.
I will do that.
All right. Well, thanks again for coming, and I'm looking forward to seeing you in live lab tomorrow.
Yes.
And work on your review questions and work on your essays for the test, and then I'll see you tomorrow.
Alrighty, sounds good. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Glad to help. Bye
Thank
now.
you. Bye-bye.